Okay, so we're learning Likkutei Sichot Parshas Nitzavim, Volume 2, and we're in at the end of section 2. We have to go back a little. So first of all, I made a mistake yesterday. I said that the Givonim were Yevusim. So even though they are from the same area, because this place is called Yevus, and they're in Givon, Kiryat Yarim, those were their places, they weren't Jebusites. They were Hivites, Chivim. It says that twice in Yeshua. But I didn't remember the verses by heart, so I didn't remember that.
Who were the Hivites?
The Chivim were one of the 7 Canaanite nations. They were what they were. I don't know.
Descendants of Shem? Ham?
No, they're all descendants of Ham. All the Canaanites. Canaan is his son. Okay. Now, what we saw was the Rebbe's first new idea here was that you make a covenant when you have the greatest connection with someone. You don't wait until the connection is being challenged, when it's weakening. You do it when it's the best. And then you can connect at a place that's higher than your rational mind, lemala mitam v'dat, and that will keep the connection between you. Again, he calls it here love, but he means that like in Rosh Hashanah, one of the things that we mention in Musaf is Zocher Brit, one who remembers the covenant. Okay. But now he says something new. לעורר את הקדוש ברוך הוא כביכול להתקשר עם נשמות ישראל למעלה מטעם ודעת. To awaken God to connect to us above the intellect, above rational arguments. To do that, הרי זה על ידי עבודה של כולכם כאחד. That is achieved by standing all of us together as one. Why? What's the idea here? Because to stand together as one, ההתמסרות שלמעלה מטעם ודת, שכן על פי השכל הרי האדם זהו ראש ולשני שואב מים, ומה קשר ביניהם? Because to stand as one means that you're like saying that there's no difference between the head and the foot and the leg. They're on the same level. Really, usually we say that a person attains that within himself when he lies down. So when you're lying down, your head and your feet are at the same level. But when you're standing up, that's not the case. It's clear what the head is and it's clear what the feet are. The feet are only supporting the head. So how do you get to a state in which the mind, meaning the head, and so he says, כדר שמוסבר לגבי עניין בכל מאודיך, על ידי המאוד שלך. So he says, this is done by the special quality that a human being has, that he can go beyond his limits. Right? There is the limited faculties of the soul. For instance, love and fear that are, or love and awe of God, which are limited by the person's intellect. They depend on the intellect. So as much as the intellect can understand and it can fathom, that's as much as he can love, meaning be connected to, and as much as he can feel awe. But that's all true when we say b'chol nafshecha, with all of your soul. With all of your soul means with your, call them conscious faculties. But then we say b'chol me'odecha. Right? This is all explained in Torah or in Parshas Miketz. So then we say b'chol me'odecha, with all of your more. It's usually explained with all of your might. But the idea behind it is that you can go beyond your natural faculties. That a human being has the special quality that he can go beyond his limits. A human being can always push himself further than what his limits are. So there's one way of pushing yourself, which is like if you're training for a marathon, let's say. Okay, so you push yourself a little bit more every day. but you're really not going infinite. You're just adding a little bit more. B'chol mo'odecha means that you can completely set aside all the limits. How can this be? The physical can't do this. The physical is limited. It's one of the reasons. What do we learn from the fact that a human being is 70% water? So he says there in Torah, or the difference between water and fire. So water is finite; it represents the finite, and the fire represents the infinite. So a person is made out of 70% water. So it's like the joke about the guy who drank 95 proof, 190 proof, and he was taken to the hospital. And then they gave him the next day. They told him, "Listen, you can't drink this type of alcohol. So why don't you go down to 30%? Drink something like a liquor or something like that." So he says, "What are you, crazy? 5% of water almost killed me. You want to give me 70% of water?" So the idea is true about that. And on the one hand, you can look at it and say a human being is made out of 70% water. What does that mean? That the human being is 70% finite. But what about the other 30%? So the other 30% is infinite. Where does that happen? So he says it's like the division between 7 and 3. Okay. It's very interesting. That we have a phrase in Shas. This is especially in the last chapter of Yevamos, which they learned not long ago in Daf Yomi, a couple of months ago, in Perek HaIsha Rabbah. And there's a lot of discussion about something called Maim she'en lahem sof, water without end. Okay. They don't say that about the land. Okay. Why do you have to say that about the water? So it's true that it's 70% water and only 30% land. But when you look at how it's divided, you see the flip side of it. What's the flip side? The flip side is that there's 7 continents and only 3 oceans. Okay, this is Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian. Those are called the oceans. Everything else is seas. Seas are like projections of the ocean into the land. That's the difference between a sea and an ocean. An ocean is no projection into the land. It's just separate. It's completely separate. So there's 3 oceans and 7 continents. So how does this work with the Sfirot? So the 3 oceans, they're like the intellectual Sfirot. They're like Keter Chochmah Binah, or Chochmah Binah Dat. And then the 7 continents, they're like the midos of the person, from loving kindness all the way down to Malchus. So what do we get from all this? We got something very interesting, that the Alter Rebbe there says that even though the majority of what we are is limited, we have this quality called B'chol Me'odecha, that we can go completely beyond our limits. Where can we do that? So you can't do that in the body. In the body doesn't know yet how to do this. Where you do this is in the intellect. Where you do this is in the higher faculties. In the higher faculties, especially the crown, the keter, you can go beyond all your limits. When you go beyond all your limits, then something new appears. What's the something new that appears? That if before we were saying that there's a difference between the head and the leg, there's a difference between the water bearer and the head, and the head of the people, the head of the tribe. When you go beyond the head, when you go beyond your limits, so then suddenly there's no difference anymore. And suddenly they both are just as equally, call it, important in Hashem's eyes as anything else. Everything is equal. That's called the sovev. That's called the surrounding light. So when you reach that level, they can become equal. They can become the same thing. So what he's saying here is that in order for you, that when you reach that level in your intellect, that's understanding, that's beyond reason, then you draw down Hashem's ability to be infinite also. That He's without limits also. Usually the way that we approach Hashem is through His limited appearances. He appears as in this way, that way, and so on. These are things that we grasp. But by going beyond and seeing the unity of the entire people, I draw down from Hashem that ability. I don't think so. They're not getting it. Let's leave it open. Maybe just leave it open. So people are looking for some kind of, what do you do so that you get spontaneous healing in a way that's a miracle? So the answer is you have to go beyond the limits. You have to call down that ability, that light of Hashem that is infinite. It's true that this light permeates everything, but you want it to manifest somehow. So you have to break out of your limits, and when you break out of your limits, that's called Bechol Mo'odecha, with all of your more, with all of your might. And that, he says here, draws down the infinite light of Hashem. And now he says something very important. He says, על ידי המאות שלך, אף שהוא שלך בלבד, אתה ממשיך את המאות שבאמצע. So even though you only broke your individual personal limits, what's revealed is the universal unlimited aspect of God. And that's a tremendous thing that happens. Okay. The next thing is, he says, section 3, ברם כולכם כאחד חייב להיות באמת, על האדם לדעת שאכן כך הוא המציאות. He says this is not a trick, this is not a parlor trick. You have to really grasp the world this way. You have to see things really as one. And like I always try to say, that if you can see, if you take a snapshot of everything that you're seeing right now, let's say you're in a room with a king, with a queen, whatever it is, and you take a snapshot of it. And so in the snapshot, when it becomes two-dimensional and like frozen in time, there's no real difference between any of the fixtures in the room. It could be the king, it could be you, it could be the table. They all make up they're all one of the same tapestry. So you have to see things that way sometimes. It's like not with all the things that we attribute to people and to objects, with all the value that we attribute to it. But take away the value. Right? That's basically, I mean, we were just talking late at night that Jordan Peterson is coming to Israel the day after Yom Kippur. And they're going to have Ben Shapiro interview him. Which is kind of ridiculous. Why is it ridiculous? Yeah, well, they're both right-wing, like conservatives. Jordan Peterson is probably the most famous intellectual today, maybe in the world, maybe just in the right wing. I'm not sure. And Ben Shapiro is like one of the best debaters around. He's also conservative, and he's from Jew, which is kind of defeating the purpose. Because when you interview someone, you want to get someone who has a different perspective to interview them. You don't bring two birds of the same feather. They should have gotten someone like what's his name? I forget. There's this Pepe is his name, something like that. He's a philosopher here at Hebrew U. He's a really far left thinker. You get somebody like that to interview Jordan Peterson, at least you get a discussion. At least you get something new. You get Ben Shapiro to interview him. It's like you're hearing the same thing in two voices. There's nothing new about it. But in any case, we're talking about that maybe there's a possibility that he'd come to meet Rav Ginsburg. So why did I think of him? Because the thing that he sees as the most detrimental, the most problematic in the world is the breakdown of hierarchy. He sees that what the left is doing, what the progressives are doing, is breaking down all hierarchy. Right? And that's the worst thing in the world. But we've talked about this a few times, that the view of the right in general is very limited. We're not, the Torah is not right-wing or left-wing. It's everything. So the left side, the right side says there has to be a hierarchy. That would be like saying, well, the head is different than the water bearer, than the woodcutter. But there's also the left side of the argument here. And the left side of the argument would say, but Hashem is infinite. So there is a perspective, and that's what the Rebbe is trying to foster in Dafka in Rosh Hashanah, specifically in Rosh Hashanah. You should have this perspective. You have to be a leftist on Rosh Hashanah. You can't be conservative. You can't think in terms of a hierarchy. That's what he's saying here. Because if you think in terms of hierarchy, you're necessarily putting the head above the legs. And here he's saying the whole idea is that you have to see that everything is equal. The breakdown of hierarchy. There's no hierarchy at all. That's the whole point. If you want to reveal the infinite nature of God, you have to be willing to break down all the hierarchies. There's no difference between me and the king of England. Now there's a king. Yeah. There's no difference at all. There's no difference between me and Moshe Rabbeinu. Of course there's a difference. But I have to look at it from the perspective of the Sovev Kol Almin, of the light that surrounds all worlds, and then I can see that there's no... that's what we do on Rosh Hashanah. There's no difference between us. So it's one of the reasons why the minhag of Chabad is just to say Tehillim all day long. Why do you say Tehillim all day long? Because it's saying we're all servants. It doesn't matter who I am. It doesn't matter what my status in life is. On Rosh Hashanah, we're all servants of the King. We're all equal before the King. So there's a time for this and a time for that. Really, the complex individual understands that they serve together. Hierarchy and lack of hierarchy are two forces in the psyche that need to work together. They can't be separate. Okay? So he says you have to do this for real. That this is really the reality. On Rosh Hashanah, this has to be a reality. There is no hierarchy at all. And by the way, we see that on Rosh Hashanah, it's not like on Yom Kippur when the Kohen Gadol goes into the Holy of Holies. And then there's a clear hierarchy. We're different than he is. On Rosh Hashanah, everybody's the same. Everybody's standing outside. Nobody's going anywhere. Nothing important is happening. Even the service is, in many ways, it's almost pedestrian. It's almost like a weekday. You don't feel anything special going on. Because it says it all serves this purpose of seeing yourself equal to everyone. So tomorrow we'll see more of these arguments, and then we'll see the famous story from Reb Hillel Parich about his trying to see the Alter Rebbe, and what happened there when he did everything in his power to see him, but still didn't see him. But something important happened.
Okay, but tomorrow won't be easy, because tomorrow...
Oh, okay.
Don't fit in both speeches and the
So we'll do it after.
No,
in the afternoon. When you come back. We'll talk about it.